Hey, this is Elijah with the Oxygen team, and in this video, we'll be building a responsive WordPress website using Oxygen. Now, the only real preparation I've done is I've grabbed a bunch of images of coffee from pexels.com, and I decided I wanted to build a website for either a coffee company or like a coffee shop or something like that. I'm not sure where it's going to go from here, but this is the prep I've got, and we're going to work with that and see what we end up with. I've also got a blank WordPress site, fresh install with just Oxygen and a couple other utility plugins installed. This is running on Cloudways hosting, and I do have the varnish caching turned off while I build this site. And that's just because we don't want to be fighting the cache while we're trying to see our changes on the front end. And varnish tends to be particularly aggressive in that area. So I always advise to turn it off when you're building on Cloudways, and then turn it back on when you're done with your major changes. So without further ado, let's just jump into a page, and we'll just add a new page called Home. Publish that, publish, close this little box out, and click Edit with Oxygen. Now, we are going to be creating some templates and things like that, but when I'm first working on a very early design on a site, I like to do everything in a single page, and then later on I can copy it out to templates and things like that where I need it. So we'll build our header and footer and a basic structure for our home page on this page, and then divide everything out into templates once we have our design. Now, the first thing I like to do when I first create an Oxygen site is to set up my typography. So I'm going to add a section, and we'll delete this later, but I'm going to add a bunch of headings. So we'll just add a heading, and then we'll duplicate that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times, and then we're going to change the tag on each one to get our H1 through H6 elements on the page so we can kind of see what we're working with here. Go down to H5 and H6, which I very rarely go down to, H4, 5, 6, but it's good to have styles established for them. And then let's just throw in a regular text element with some margin above it, and we're going to just put in some lipsum, one paragraph, and I'm using text expander, so I type lipsum 1p, and it just pops that in for me. These are going to be our basic typographical elements that we want to style. And we want the site to be responsive. So keeping that in mind early on is going to make it really, really easy to ensure it adapts to smaller screen sizes later. And with that being said, let's jump over to Manage, Settings, Global Styles, and Headings. And actually, let's go back. We need to decide our fonts first, because that could impact how big we want our headings to be and such. So to do that, I usually jump out to fontpair.co and take a look at their font pairs. Let's see all of their font pairings and try to find one that looks decent for like a coffee shop type of a thing. And I actually like this first combination, Play Fair Display and Enter. So we'll go with that. So let's jump over here. Let's set the display font to Play Fair Display. And then the text font is going to be Enter. Perfect. That'll look nice. And now we can go back to the heading section and start playing with these heading sizes. Now, I don't always like super heavy headings. 700 sometimes a little too heavy. Let's go down to 600, 500, something like that. A little lighter. I feel like that kind of matches the vibe we're going for here. And then the font sizes, we're going to use either Rem or maybe Clamp. I'm not 100% sure. I think I want to try to use Clamp. So let's go down here and just start typing our Clamp. And we're going to mostly use Rem units here. So we'll do something like, let's see, our base is 16 pixels. So we'll make the smallest like 2 Rem. Then our scaling unit, we're going to want to go with viewport width plus 1 rem, so like 5 VW plus 1 rem. This allows it to still zoom for users that might want to zoom in and out. And then the max is going to be something like, I don't know, let's try 6 rem. That's pretty big, but I think it'll work. Okay, so now we can copy this and we can set those sizes for our other elements too. But first, let's jump out to the front end and make sure this scales like we want it to. So we'll inspect and go down here and go to responsive mode and just Yeah, that looks pretty good. That gives us a heading that never gets too small, but also scales really well with our screen size. And you'll notice that doing this little bit of prep work up front with your headings will save you a ton of work on responsive design later, because headings a lot of times are the cause of responsive problems. Okay, so let's go down to the H2 and let's set this to something like, let's try 5.5 rem at the biggest. And then the smallest, actually we need to change this to none first. And then the smallest, we're going to do 1.75 rem. So let's see what that looks like. We may have to change our scaling unit also, so that they don't end up being the same size while they're scaling, see? And actually it's not quite big enough of a difference there, so let's go back in and change this to 5 rem on the biggest that we want it to be. And then our viewport width element, we're going to change to something like 4. Okay, that looks a little bit better. And that'll give us kind of a precedent to follow as we continue styling our smaller headings. Okay, it's a little bit smaller, continues to scale down, and does go smaller than the largest heading, I do believe. So that looks pretty good. So 1.75. Okay, so then we'll go down to the H3, set it to the none unit, copy in our clamp. We're going to drop this down to 4 rem. And then our viewport width unit, let's just go on down to 3. And then let's go down to 1.5 rem at the smallest. And then we can continue working our way down here. So let's go to none, and then we'll just adjust this. We may make our differences a little bit more subtle as we get down to the final heading tags. Like instead of going down to 3 rem here, we might go down to 3.5, and then we'll do 2.5 viewport width, and then 1.25 at the smallest, 1.25 rem. And actually, it's very unlikely that we will use our H5 and H6 elements. I very rarely do on a basic site like this. So I'm gonna just save some time and not mess with these. But if you were building a site where you knew you were gonna use your H5 and H6 elements, you would definitely wanna make sure those were styled in the same exact way that we did these up here. Okay, so having done that, we now have scaling headings, which will save us a ton of trouble. And let's get rid of the H5 and H6. If we end up using those, I will go back and add those clamp styles for those as well. So let's jump up here and just look. We've got our big H1, H2, H3, H4, and they're all scaling just fine. Now, another thing I like to do is adjust the line height. Now, we only need to adjust it once for the H1 element, and that will cascade down to the others, unless you wanted different line heights for each one. But in this case, I think something like 1.2 or 1.3 will work pretty good for all of them. And now we get on to our body text, which is going to be 16 pixels by default, but we might want to beef that up a little bit. So let's do, I don't know, let's change it to rem and do like 1.25 rem. It's a little bit bigger, a little bit easier to read. I kind of like that, which 1.25 rem would come out to about 20 pixels. And then line height, let's play with this a little bit. 1.6 might be a bit much. Let's try 1.5, 0.6. Let's do 1.5. Okay, perfect. And then we're going to get into colors. Now, color is always a fun thing to set up at the beginning of the site because it's going to determine a lot about how the site looks. Now, what I've done is I have grabbed a bunch of images from Pexels, like I mentioned at the beginning, and most of the images are of coffee beans and coffee cups and things like that. So we're going to pull some tones out of those images. Now that we have our typography set up here, let's just create a new section and let's drop some images in there. So we'll just put in an image element and we're going to browse, and then we're going to upload all these images I got from Pexels. And I'm using an app called Unclutter for this little tray up here that has notes, file area, and then the clipboard history on the left-hand side. Most folks end up asking about that, so I figured I'd mention it this time. Let's let these images upload and start thinking about what we want this site to look like. We want it to look modern, but we also want it to be fairly warm because we're dealing with coffee, and coffee's warm, and brown is a warm color. And if this is a coffee shop, which I haven't quite decided yet, then we want it to be inviting, right? We want people to want to come to our establishment. So we need it to look nice and comforting and things like that. So I think we can draw most of the tones we want from the images we have here, which is why I'm going ahead and uploading them. And I do have a duplicate. I'm going to get rid of that. And then let's just drop in a couple of these as kind of like a mood board type of thing. I really like this one. I think we'll end up prominently featuring this on the homepage. And then let's add another image. Actually, we'll just duplicate that one, and let's grab another one with some different colors that we can pull from. I like the coffee bean tones here, so we'll do that. And then let's jump up to the front end, and I'm going to use a browser extension called Colorzilla. Let's scroll down to our images, and first let's see if this is like a true black here, or if this is, you know, not quite. Yeah, that's completely black. Now we don't want the black from this, but we do want a very dark color. So let's do something like that. And let's jump over here to Oxygen and go to Manage, Settings, Settings, and go back to Colors. And we're just going to start adding some global colors. So we'll call this black and drop that in. That's what we'll end up using for most of our text probably. And then we need to get a primary color. So I usually use, since I'm not really a designer, I usually use a black, which is usually not completely pure black, white a lot, and then maybe some grays, and then like one primary color. It makes it a lot simpler for somebody that's not an expert in color theory and design to kind of make something that looks cohesive without having too many colors going on. So I want to get my primary color from these coffee beans. So let's use Colorzilla again, and we're going to pick the color from the page, and just let's hover around and see if we can find something. I want something rich, kind of chocolatey maybe. So we'll go until we find something. I feel like this kind of a tone here would be a good primary color. So we'll go over here and add that as primary. And now what we can do is we can feed that color in. First of all, let's make sure it's not terrible. So I'm going to add a section, and assuming we might have a section with this as the background color. Yeah, that's not bad. So we're going to feed that color in to Palx, which is located at palx.jxnblk.com. And this just generates a color palette based on a color you feed it. So this is going to give us some stuff here that we can work with, some saturated grays and things like that. So let's grab this really light, almost white color and put that in as almost white. It's going to be handy. And then we'll add one that's just actually white, which you don't actually have to use a global color here, but if you want to change it later, having it be a global color will save you a lot of trouble. And then let's see if there's anything else we might want to use here. I kind of like this dark gray, though I don't know. I'm not sure exactly where we'll use it, so we'll grab it and then maybe use it somewhere. And then we'll call this grayish. I have very, very good color naming conventions if you haven't noticed. So I think this will give us enough to work with, though I would like to have a lighter hue of the primary. So let's add another one here, and we'll just eyeball it ourselves. So this is going to be, actually we need to paste that in there, and we'll call it primary light. And this is going to be just a tad bit lighter. It's very, very red actually. Yeah, let's do that. And then we'll do a primary dark. And then paste that in. That's our base color. And then we'll go a little bit darker. There we go. That should give us plenty of colors to play with here. Okay, so now we've done the basic setup. Let's look through our settings, manage settings, and see if there's anything else that we might want to do here. So we set up our colors, we have our font set up, our headings and body text are set up, though we do need to set the color of our headings. So we'll set these to our black color by default. We also could go, if we wanted to go a little bit softer, we could go with like a more brown color, but I'm not sure if that's going to work for what we want. So let's just go black for now, which again isn't pure black, it's just almost black. And then for the body text, let's play around with this. We could go with black, and that would look fine. Like that's the safe choice, right? Now let's go back, body text, links. Links is a good one to change. Let's go to all links. We don't want them to be blue. Let's set them to this kind of lighter brown color. That'll be a nice little accent throughout. And then do we want them to be underlined? Maybe. Let's put a link in here and so that we can see what we're doing. That's usually helpful. Let's just turn this into a link. And we'll just give it a hashtag or a pound. So you can see it's really subtle. So we might actually want an underline too. That looks pretty decent. And then on hover, we can just turn it maybe this dark brown color. Yeah, that's fine. And it's pretty subtle, but we're going to remove the underline on hover. Okay, that way we can signal our links without really having too much trouble. And I don't think we need to get into all of these, except for the button border radius we might want to do. Let's do 4 pixels. That's going to be the base border radius that we use if we use any border radius. And back into settings, links, width, and breakpoints. We don't need to mess with the breakpoints, but we do need to change the section padding and columns padding. So let's set these to 64 and 64, then 32 and 32 on the left and right. And then the columns padding, we'll just do 16 pixels all the way around. And 16. And we'll go back and make adjustments if we need to. Then we'll leave animate on scroll alone and JavaScript stuff alone for now. This would be where we'd set our smooth scroll to hash links, which we may or may not need to do. Okay, so now let's just take a look real quick on the front end and see. This is kind of a style guide, if you will. It's not a very good one, but this gives us a general feel of the site. And then we should see if we start scaling down, everything changes and still looks pretty decent. Our body text does not scale. We don't want it to get too small. We don't want it to be hard to read. So we probably won't tweak that too much unless we need to. So now we can get into actually designing the site. So we can jump back over to Oxygen and get started. So we're kind of flying blind here. I don't have a design or anything that I'm basing this off of. I did look at a couple of coffee related or coffee adjacent websites and wasn't real happy with what they looked like. So I think we're just gonna go with kind of the basic mainstays of a modern website. We're gonna have like a hero section with a big image, maybe like an overlay header over that with like a logo, things like that. So let's just start there. We'll start basic. I'm going to keep this stuff around at the bottom of our page and we'll delete it later. But for now, it's a good reference to go back and look at to see the design choices that we've made. So let's add a section and we're going to want to make sure it's up at the top. And this is going to be a hero. So I'm going to make it under advanced size and spacing. I'm going to make it 100% viewport height. Now, with web design in general, and especially Oxygen for a visual builder, you want to use classes early and often. So instead of adding the height to this element's ID, in case I ever want to add a header or a hero to another page, I'm going to create a hero class that will hold the settings for these heroes. So let's just click our selector drop down and let's think of a prefix here, maybe CFE for coffee, and then dash hero. Okay, so this is going to be a hero section, and we're going to set the height to 100% viewport height. So it takes up the full screen when you first land here. And then we'll go back to the ID to change the background image, but first, let's lock this class. So we can click this little checkbox under Advanced to lock this class so that when we come back to it, we're not going to accidentally change things on it that this class shouldn't be responsible for. So let's go back to the ID, go to Advanced Background, and let's browse for our background image. There's the one that I had envisioned using, and I think it looks pretty good. And what we can do is we can have some text here along the left-hand side. that introduce people to our website and what we do. And then this image is kind of the focal point on the right-hand side. Now we have it set to cover. I wonder if we have any room to move it off to the right. Okay, so I want a little more room on the left-hand side for my text. So what I'm gonna do, I'll change this unit to percentage, and we're gonna move it -5%. I'm not quite sure yet how far we want it, but we want it off towards the right. And we have this little problem of this repeat on the x-axis here. We can set it to no repeat, and then we can set the background color to our dark gray here, which actually came from this image, which gives us a less jarring change there, but we'll fix that here in just a minute. Let's save this and make sure that our offset looks decent. All right, so see here, it's not quite doing what we want it to do on the front end. Let's look if we hide our sidebars. Yeah, because it's so much wider, it's just not quite doing it. So let's change the left offset to something a little more. We might actually have to use pixels here to get it to be predictable like we want it to be. So let's set the left offset to something like 250 pixels. Okay, so let's do that. But since we used pixels, we might have issues with the offset when we start narrowing the viewport, as you can see there. But not until about here, which would be about our 992 breakpoint. So I think we're going to be okay for a while, but we'll make some adjustments there as needed. So let's jump back over here and let's ease this transition here. We're going to go down to the gradient and we're going to add two colors. One is going to be our dark gray and one is going to be transparent. And then we're going to change the angle to 90 degrees. There we go. Now we're getting that soft transition. And then we're going to change our gradient stop points here to something that's going to make it a little more smooth so that we're not covering up our coffee image, but we still don't see that line on the left-hand side. There we go. It's pretty much gone at that point. So let's save that. And I always like to preview on the front end, even though you can just kind of hide everything here and see it. I think it's just an old habit from before we had the ability to hide the left pane. I would always just jump up to the front end to see it at full width. Now, not so necessary, but I still do it kind of out of habit. But it's also a nice reminder to save my work because I always save and then jump up to the front end. So that looks really decent and I'm liking the direction we're going. We're going to have some nice overlay header stuff above this. Now we're going to want to add some text over this. So let's just drop in an H1 here and let's set the text color to white. But first, again, classes early and often. Let's just call this class CFE typo white. Now we can go with our not quite white here, or we can go with the pure white, but I think we'll go with the not quite white in this case. And then let's just change our heading to say something like coffee done well. And then we'll add some subtext here. And now we can use that white class that we created for our typography. And then we'll do lipsum 1p. Perfect. Now, we don't want our text to cover up our image on the right-hand side. So what we can do is first, let's lock this class, advanced, lock that, because all it needs to do is set the text color to white. And then let's go back to the ID on this element, and let's just set the advanced size and spacing width to 50%. And that's going to work really well here on the desktop, but we will have to adjust that as we move down to smaller sizes. Now we're also going to want some space below this heading. So let's jump over to the ID. And actually we're going to do this with a class. So let's do CFE bottom small. We'll just set up our spacing classes. I find most commonly I need margin bottom to space things out because I usually place the margin on the element that is above whatever needs the space. So we'll do CFE bottom small, which is going to be size and spacing. Margin bottom is going to be 16 pixels. And then we'll add another one called CFE bottom medium. And margin bottom will be 32 on that. And then CFE bottom large. And that'll be maybe 64. And then we'll do CFE bottom huge, which will be 128. And then we can go through and lock those classes and then remove the ones we don't want. So I think the large looks pretty good there, so we'll leave it on there, but I'm going to lock it so that we don't make any changes we don't want to make on there. Get rid of medium. We're going to get rid of small after we lock it. And then that should be everything we need. Let's just go into manage selectors and look at our selectors here. So now you can see we're building up a little bit of a system here with our classes that should make things a lot easier moving forward. So that looks pretty good. Now, because we're doing a responsive site, I'm going to go ahead and step down to where I think our 50% doesn't work anymore on this. And we're going to just set this to advanced size and spacing with 100% instead, so that it kind of spreads out. And then we might, I don't know, we might center things on this once we do that, but I'm not really sure if I want to yet. So we're going to avoid that. Let's just jump down to 768 and 480. That works. Problem, our hero element is set to 100 VH, which means it's never going to be taller than that, which causes problems when you have elements that stretch outside of that. So that's kind of a rookie mistake. That's really easy to make. So what we need to do is we need to grab our hero selector, unlock it, go to size and spacing, and set the min height to 100 VH instead. The minimum height this element's going to have is 100 VH, but it can go beyond that. Jump up to the front end, refresh here. So this actually is a really, decent looking little landing area here. But we're also going to have some navigation overlaying the top. So let's go ahead and build that out. But first, let's just inspect. I may as well just keep the mobile inspection mode up from now on, because we're going to be looking a lot at our responsive design. So that looks pretty decent. There's some tweaking we could do with the image as well, so that it's still kind of visible on smaller viewport widths, but by the same token, you don't really want anything behind this text distracting the user. But that being said, let's go over and first let's lock this back, and then let's jump over to the ID, and let's go down to, when did we do that? 992. So let's set the left offset to 0 pixels at 992, and we'll just see what that looks like. I think with the gradient, it will probably be okay. So there, you still get a taste of that image. And then if we go down really small, we're not going to have our text running out of the section. So that looks pretty good. I'm happy with it. We need to now start working on the navigation. So let's go back up to all devices and drop in a header builder. And we'll drag that up in the structure to the top and save. So we know we want this header to be overlaid on this hero section. So we can just start there. Let's select the header builder, go to overlay, and say always overlay. We might adjust that later to make sure it doesn't overlay on smaller screen sizes, but for now let's just set it to always. And then let's add some extra padding to our hero section here. So it's got 64, let's give it 128 maybe, and then we can always tweak that later. Now in our header builder, we're going to want a couple of things. We know we want a logo, so I'm just going to use an icon element. Actually, let's drop a div in because I might want to put things side by side. And then let's add an icon, and let's add some text. And let's select the div and set the typography color to white so that we don't have to set it on each individual element. And then let's change the icon. I bet we have a coffee cup in here. Let's see. Maybe we do. Perfect. Now let's check linear icons. I like the Font Awesome one a bit better. Okay, and then what do we want to call this establishment? I'm thinking we'll call it Perfect Roast. Awesome. So we'll just center all this stuff in that div, and that gives us just our little logo section here. Now, a tip, if you're working with an overlay header, you might notice that sometimes when you go up to select elements, they kind of disappear, or you can't quite click on things. If you come in from the top, it's a lot easier, but if you don't want to mess with all that, just design your header first and then set it to overlay once you're done, which we may end up doing here if that gets too annoying. But for now, that will work. And let's make this thing a link to the home page, and everything looks pretty good. Now for this site, since we're really focusing on responsiveness, I think we're going to make the menu behind a hamburger all the time. So let's try our pro menu here. Let's drag this over to the right row, and then let's set the mobile menu toggle below to always. And then let's go in and adjust our open icon here. We're going to want a hamburger or like 3 lines. Let's look at what we have if we scroll through. This will work perfectly, so that's going to be our icon. We're going to remove the text. We don't want any text. And then we're going to set our icon size to 32 pixels, which we actually need to adjust the icon size on this element as well. Let's set it to 64. And then back to our menu here. We don't want to open it though. So let's go to mobile menu, open icon layout. And we're going to adjust the icon color to white. Icon hover color. I don't know if we want to change it. Do we? Probably not. And then padding, let's just set it to 16 pixels to be consistent. And then go back to mobile menu. We're not worried about desktop styles for the most part because we're mostly just styling the mobile menu. Let's change our close icon a little bit. Let's just remove the text. And then let's put the position. Let's put it 16 pixels from the top. And let's try 100 or 95% from the left so that it's kind of up in the top right corner where your hamburger is. Icon size, we'll set it to 32. And then color, let's change it to our dark brown here. Maybe that one, primary dark. That looks pretty cool. And then the rest of that I think we can leave alone. Now we need to change our menu styles. I don't think we want to do off canvas on this one. We're just going to do a basic full screen menu. Background color, let's try playing with something a little more intense. So if we open that, yeah, it's a little less jarring if you're going from like a darker page to this. But then we need to change our link text to white, and let's use our global colors here. Link padding, I think, is probably okay. Container padding's okay. We could center stuff, but that looks messy. Let's leave it on the left. Now, what I do want to adjust is the drop-down stuff. So let's go back out here and go to mobile drop-downs. We're going to leave the entire parent toggle as a drop-down. So when we click anything with a drop-down, we're not going to follow that link. We're just going to get the sub-menu. So we'll need to keep that in mind when we're building our actual menus. And we'll leave our drop-downs as toggles. And then drop-down background color, we'll kind of mess with that, but basically it's going to add a little bit of a shading behind the drop-downs, which sometimes is nice, sometimes you don't really want it. So let's change our drop-down icon size to 16 pixels. Let's change the border top to 0 pixels. Now we probably are going to want to adjust kind of the padding and stuff now that we have these drop-down links to be concerned with. So let's go to menu styles and change our link padding to 8 on the top, 8 on the bottom, and 32 on the left and right. And then items min width, let's do like maybe 300 pixels. And then the final adjustment we need to make, well, after we change our close icon back to white because we changed the background color of the menu, the final adjustment we want to make is the drop-down icon itself, the toggle icon here. We want that to be different. So let's go to desktop menu. This one's actually hiding under here. And we need to find, not desktop menu, desktop drop-downs. There we go. This is where we set the icon. So we're going to do a chevron down. There we go. And now if we go into the front end, we should see our little menu situation. If we click that, we get our full screen menu. And it's very basic, but I think it will work for now. And it's very navigable and it's very mobile friendly. So let's go down to our smaller size here. I usually go to like a minimum of 320 pixels. And that, yeah, that all works pretty well. So we can go back up and jump into the builder and see what else we need to do. So I think that about covers it for our header and our little hero section there. Now, there's going to be a lot more to building out this site, and we should move a little bit quicker from here, but I think that's going to cover it for this episode. What we've done here is we've set a very solid baseline and done the groundwork that makes building a responsive site easier by doing all of our global styles responsively and using classes and things like that as we started building things out. So next time we will jump into building out the rest of this page and making sure it all adjusts properly as the viewport narrows. So again, this is Elijah with the Oxygen team, and that's how to build a responsive WordPress website in 2021, part 1. I hope to see you on the next episode, and thank you very much for watching.